I want to start by addressing this ridiculous nickname that I got. So everyone in the music industry knows me as Arlo. No one knows me as Paul. When I was 19, I got hired by, at the time, Australia's kind of quite a big band. And the hiring process involved their manager calling my parents' house, of which I picked up, and they're like, "Do you have a passport?" And I said, "Yeah," and they're like, "Good, you're getting on a plane tomorrow to New Zealand to start work with this band." So I got there, flew, went to the rehearsal place to meet the band, and the drummer came up to me and he said, "G'day mate, what's your name?" I said, "Paul." He said, "That's my name." I'm like, "Yeah, I know, like Australia's biggest band, I know who I'm talking to." And he said, "There's already another Paul there." I said, "Okay." He said, "What's your last name?" I said, "Guthrie." He said, "Okay, I'm going to call you Arlo." I had no clue what that reference was, and probably about a year later when I worked it out, I was very glad that he didn't call me Woody. Anyway, what do? I am a production and lighting designer, which is kind of two jobs. Production designer would design everything that you would see at a show, and then a lighting designer would design how you see it, I guess. There's some times when I work as one, sometimes when I work as as the other, and then sometimes when I do both. So primarily, part of my job is to make all that kind of garbage. So I get hired by, usually, my main line of work is music. So I'll meet with the band and work out what it is they want to do. And the design process is kind of in blocks. So the first thing, you see what they want to do, and you physically work out where we're going to put lights, what kind of lights. And I don't really think about what the lights are going to do now because, and part of the thing that I'll address is the advancement in technology in lighting. But we basically work out what lights we want to put where, have a discussion, get all that built. There's usually 2 or 3 months during that time. And then when we get there, we work out what the lights are going to do, and that's this other whole layer. I kind of feel like we should be like Pee-wee's Playhouse, right? Like the secret word, and when I say layer, you're all like, yeah! So that was terrible. But that's when we kind of like get to make all the crazy magic. And my career has kind of existed in this Goldilocks zone where when I started, we were basically working with the same kind of instruments and the same kind of equipment that had been in existence since the start of theatrical lighting, so almost 80 years. And then over the course of my career, we've had all these technical innovations that have come along that have given us other ways to creatively build shows. And every time we've done that, that's kind of unleashed another whole layer of, there you go. That was your cue. Or another whole tool, another whole paintbrush. And some of these things have been like massive advances where we add, video is a great example. And I'll get to some of the examples, but here are all the kinds of things that we do. Part of the thing that I've always loved is setting a mood. What can you see? What can you not see? We're going to make someone look good. We're going to make them look ugly. Female artists, we definitely want to make them look good. Doesn't help to make them look ugly unless that's what they're wanting. Events like this is just down the road. Very lucky to get involved in this crash dice event that happened every year, and that was another level of kind of bringing all kinds of skills together. It was half sports, half entertainment, half insanity, which I know equals 3 halves, but again, like a great example of something that exists here in town that you wouldn't think to entertain people. Onward and onward. So many blinking lights. Flames too, so we can incorporate all kinds of things. So I started lighting school plays in Australia when I was 14 years old, and this was the kind of stuff that we had. And at the time, so these are kind of like 1950s, 1960s British lighting instruments. There's a spotlight and a washlight. And so the design process or the creative process is basically only really two kind of layers. The first thing is what light can we put where? So kind of what angle? Physically, where can it go? It can only hang on this pipe, so we're going to put a light there. And we can commit to the color. We'd hang it, we'd point it, and then the only other creative choices we could have beyond that is it on or is it off? Working the magic. But within is it on or is it off, we could fade, we could, and at this stage I started kind of learning that there are all kinds of things that started unpacking at that point. One, noticing how light works and how emotion is tied to light. Also looking at, this technique was kind of founded and made popular by God back in the day. So we kind of use nature as a reference. Why, if I come out at 7 o'clock at night and the sun's really low and it's amber, does that feel awesome? Does that feel? Why, if I come out at midday and the light's directly overhead, do I feel like ugly and ghastly? So lots of kind of real world experiences and ways of kind of observing how light works and then working out how to use that to amplify and enhance whatever was happening. We were lighting primarily theatrical shows. So when we're talking about balancing the levels, there's obviously a technical thing. Can you see what's happening, or are you using the colors, the right lights with the right colors for the moment? But there was really only kind of maybe a snap blackout was something for drama, or a very slow fade. These were kind of the only choices that we were given, and all the design work had already happened because that light's already hanging there, and all you can do is turn it on and turn it off. One of the very first plays I got asked to design as a 14 or 15-year-old was Waiting for Godot, which is a Samuel Beckett play. Two characters and their plight. There's a nighttime scene that came up, and I, festered all night, and I'm like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a Chinese lantern, which is one of these things, that will invoke a feeling of the moon. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire this huge long cable on it, and it's going to, the theatrical production was in the round, and at the appropriate point we'd go to black, and this thing would come up like the rising moon. The quality of the light coming out of the China ball is like the moon. It's soft, and the shape fit. I thought this was genius. Of course. The one thing that this genius didn't count on is the fact that I'd bought like $1 pulleys that were in the roof. So when my stagehand mate was over the back pulling the cable, this thing went. So kind of blew the mood, and kind of a first lesson of how lights and sound need to play well together. And also kind of like I was actually mortified. Even though I think that I like making people laugh, it was kind of a really bummer moment, even though obviously people were amused, and it didn't damage my career, luckily. But so then I kind of transitioned into lighting music, and this was the next stage where I was like, okay, I've worked out color and I've worked out angle, but now I can start applying it to the dynamic of music, and this thing lit me up. When I was 17, I started lighting bands in Melbourne at clubs, even before I was legally allowed to get in. This was kind of the weapon of choice. And so what this unlocked now is where the theatre didn't, was that I could actually like play the lights. Fantastic. So this whole other level of kind of creativity was unlocked, and that was, I'm kind of linked to the music, and really started kind of connecting to the dynamic of music. So the drummer hits the cymbal and it's got a very sharp attack and a long decay. You can like make the lights do that. Yeah, I mean, look at that. Look how good we are. I also like the fact that they're up there and they've got all the pressure on them, and I'm out the front in the dark, like wiggling faders. And this was also kind of the start in the 80s of computer lights. As you can see, there are buttons and LEDs on it, which was about as advanced as we've got. So there was some kind of programming ability. And again, in terms of this kind of Goldilocks part of my life versus the evolution of lighting, I was at the perfect age to embrace computers or technology or programming, and I really wanted to do that. This was like, you know, I probably went to bed at night dreaming of being behind one of these things. This actually had a drawer that opened up that had a pin matrix with gold pins. And it was like channels and faders, and you'd sit in there and use the grid to make these shortcuts so that you could bring up one fader and it'd bring up a whole bunch of lights. Anyway, this thing would control 90 individual channels, and at the time that was mind-blowing. Only the hugest concert tours at the time were using these things, and I desperately wanted to get my hands on them. The next kind of evolution was kind of mechanical additions onto lights. I had a set of these things. They were called color scrollers, and it was basically a big long roll of gel, which is what we used to color the lights. You know, the first time I got one of these, I thought I was a big shot too. I owned some of these and was lighting a friend's band in Melbourne and set them all up. I had 8 of them, which I thought was mind-blowingly amazing. It was going to be so creative because each one could change 10 colors. And out of nowhere, another friend of mine said, "Do you want to come see Pink Floyd play tonight?" Of course, I said yes. So I went and saw Pink Floyd, and after Pink Floyd, and that thing changed my life, I had to go and run 8 lights with these damn scrollers on them and kind of pretend that my life was over and it was ghastly and I was never going to get to that stage. So the next advent of things that kind of came along in this period was a moving light. And this thing was called a Verilight. The band Genesis invested a bunch of money, bought these things out. And in terms of when we're talking about a leap in tools that give us creativity, they originally designed this light so that it could remotely focus. So instead of having to climb up on a ladder, change something, you had a light that would spotlight someone over here, and then you could turn it off and you could move it and you could spotlight someone over there. It had integrated color, so the color could change. You could basically change all the functions. And in terms of what it had come before, everyone thought that that was a great idea. And when they got to Barcelona to the first show, they were setting them up. It was in a bull ring. It was super dusty. And the operator hit the wheels, and with all the lights on, they all moved with the light on. And everyone was like, oh, wait. No one had actually thought of a light moving. At the time, they were either on or they were off. So all of a sudden, we had that, which was incredible. And if you guys have ever been on a shoot, or you're directors or you're cinematographers, and you know you do this, the finger, well, we started doing this. So it's like, oh, audience, or like, oh, guitar player, you know, finger lights. And so this was another, you know, and again, this product came out, it was expensive, it was proprietary. You'd be lucky if you ever got anywhere near it. I got an opportunity to learn this thing, and it was another step of like, okay, here's a computer-based thing that people were scared of. I was totally into it. The fact that it had knobs that you could spin so that you could pan and tilt, that was, no one had ever seen that before. So this was kind of the next step and the start of adding a whole other layer, whoa, of being able to make things very dynamic in a show. Also, they were very responsive. Up until that time, we'd kind of been dealing with dimmers and incandescent lights, and if you pull down a dimmer, the light fades, which is kind of sexy and kind of cool. But these things would go at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So if you were lighting a band that had that kind of music, you could all of a sudden lend that kind of energy to the songs and to the shows. And we kind of wound up with these kind of things where instead of having to hang 1,000,000 lights that only did one thing, we'd start hanging 1,000,000 lights that can do 1,000,000 things. And this was the culmination of that idea that you started having to think about physically where you put lights, and at the time you had to commit to what they were going to do, to now where you hang them wherever you want and you could make a pattern or, you know, architecturally set out the lighting. And then much later, you can tell them to do whatever you want them to do. Yeah, it's pretty fun. Part of the thing that was interesting for me in this stage was trying to work out how to be a creative person. And I think within this kind of middle part of my career, I always thought that a creative person just had a million ideas. And you get hired for a band and you just come in and you go, here's 20 killer ideas that I've got. And that never happened to me. And after a while, what I realized was that I needed a spark to kind of launch that. And so I perfected, well, I shouldn't say perfected, but I started using the technique of meeting with people and listening to them and having them give me the slightest clue for me to kind of go off. And I've kind of got better at that. At the beginning, I wasn't so good. But and I kind of realized in one meeting, I had to sit down here actually at a restaurant with Lindsay Buckingham of Fleetwood Mac to design a tour for him. And we met, and I'd worked for him for a while, and we kind of had a good relationship. And he was like, okay, what have you got? And I'm like, this. And he was kind of horrified. But I said, I've got this because I don't know what you want. I know some things that you like, but I'd rather kind of listen to what it is you kind of want to create, or the space or the feel that you want. And then I can build off that, as opposed to me coming in and saying, here's the latest light and let's put it on your show, it's going to be great. And that kind of became a way of me embracing the way that I try and be creative in this process. So that brings us to a young woman called Melanie Martinez that I had the extreme pleasure of meeting and working for. This is one of the most creative people I've ever met in my life. Every single thing that she does and breathes is creativity. This young woman designs perfume, jewelry, she makes stuff, she paints stuff, she designs the costumes. It's insane. She had 3 albums out. She wanted to bring all of her fans a big tour called the Trilogy Tour. And it was basically the culmination of her first 3 albums. So this is an artist that's only got 3 albums out, and we're doing a big, big tour. And I met with her, and she basically got out the fire hose and just sprayed everything you've ever thought of at the wall. I want, oh man, I mean, we don't have enough time, but it was like flying, fire, confetti, inflatables, trapdoors, Pepper's Ghost, front projection, rear projection, costumes, dances, just wow. So we started sketching what the show wanted to look like, how we were going to bring it to the audience. There were all kinds of logistical things, which I kind of don't like. But that, again, that's part of being creative. Like, how do you creatively solve a problem of bringing an experience to someone who's bought a ticket up there when you usually build a show for everything out here? And we just started basically building out everything that she'd thrown at the wall. So we had candy hearts with messages. I'm glad she can't read. We had inflatable gravestones, inflatable mushrooms, inflatable candles, props, weapons. We had a 2-headed rabbit carnival ride, because why not? And this was one of the first times that we started embracing AI in design. Melanie, one of her million incredible talents is knowing how to speak to AI and get it to do what she wants, which I've always said our entire job is nothing but trying to trick computers into doing what we want. On every level, especially with lighting, everything's talking to each other, even though it's not talking to each other, and we have to make it, it's just diabolical. And so within this process, we started exploring all kinds of things. She wanted, talk about the trilogy of bad things that she wanted. She wanted everything curved, get out your wallet. She wanted everything natural, get out your wallet. And we had to have everything fireproof. So that's like, get out everyone else's wallet. It's kind of like pick any 2 and we'd be okay, but she's picked all 3. So this was the kind of world that we started exploring, and obviously, you know, a lot of you are probably familiar with this process, but we used to go to Google and do an image search or go to Pinterest, and you'd only get things that already existed. And here was a chance for us to kind of make things that don't exist, or look at things that don't exist, that aren't referencing anything. Obviously, it's pulling from things that do exist, but... And then we just started building this, this crazy stage with a lot of layers on it. And then, you know, technical drawings, how we're going to do this, bid it out, blah, blah, blah. And then we get to this. So she calls up one day and she's like, Arlo, because she doesn't know my real name is Paul, I want this. You have to promise me that you can make this for me. And I said, I will promise you that I'll try to make it for you. I'm not going to fall for that one. We nicknamed this character Old Mossy Balls, which HR might have called us out if she wasn't HR. So she's like, I want this thing. I want it to roll out. I want it to roll into the audience. I want it to look organic. I want this thing to be a character. And I'm like, yeah, this thing's awesome. Like, look at that thing. Kind of really pushing down the panic and the fear and what we're going to do. And in my kind of mechanical brain, I'm like, great, we get one of those balls that you put a human in and roll them off at a festival down a hill. And we make a skin for it, and it's, you know, it's kind of cool. And we can roll it out into the audience. It won't hurt anyone. It'll be fun. So we're having the stage made by this huge staging company in Lidditz that make every tour you've ever seen. U2, Madonna, Rolling Stones. These people make everything all the time. Great experience, and they're making every other part of the stage, and they're making it organic, and they're making it round, and they're making it fireproof, and they look at this thing, they're like, we're not doing that. And I'm like, wow, I love you guys as a strategic partner. Did I mention I almost had to promise on my life that I would do this for her? And they're like, yeah, look, rolling it into the audience, diabolical. Her crowd is a very young crowd. They're very excited. They will tear things off it because they want a souvenir. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And again, you know, part of being creative is learning to listen to other people that are creative. But I don't want to be beaten on this thing. We're already doing 7,000 different crazy things, and I kind of want Old Mossy Balls to get it go. So I put it out to a bunch of people, all the smartest people that I know, and we have one meeting in Los Angeles, and we get there, and a friend of mine that makes theatrical drapes and is very good with textiles whoops up a bit of a prototype using fireproof, untearable things. She thinks she can find a ball off Temu or something that we can inflate every night. This is how we work now. And I'm like, yeah, all right. And we get to the meeting, and she shows me the sample using the materials that she can get that aren't $1 billion. And I'm like, yeah, Melanie is going to be like, absolutely not. Which she does, which is fine. I know that's going to happen. So I put it out to everyone. Meanwhile, time's ticking down. We're getting closer to the show, and you know, I'd get a text, how's Old Mossy Balls looking, you know, once a week. And I'd be like, yeah, he's looking older. So finally I find a company. We're about 2 weeks out, and we send them the thing, and they're like, we can do this. I'm like, oh my God, amazing. Somewhere in the middle of all the insanity of trying to work out how we get it done, how we get it done in the time, and people kind of going off in another direction. We have to wait 2 weeks, and they send me this, and I'm like, oh wow. Okay, you're pulling it off, but this like aluminum aircraft frame on the inside, like how much does this thing weigh? And they're like, we think it weighs 700 pounds. And it's literally within an inch the size of the inside of our semi-trailers, which is 8 feet. So this thing has to be like forked in. And I'm like, we're done. It's over. And so I had to go to Mel and say, hey, you know, the 12,000 things that we're doing this show, Old Mossy Balls is going out to die. I'm really sorry. And I think that this was probably a really good example of AI thinking of something that cannot be made in the physical world. Even though every other thing that we came up with, we could, and that was kind of interesting. It was kind of fun, and I was disappointed. And I think that, again, you know, in the creative journey, you have to make some compromises and work out how we can get through things. And a lot of times things are a great idea, and then when you actually realize how it's going to be deployed or the other things that it's got to satisfy, you kind of get into trouble. And this was a great example. But we wound up with this show, and it was very layered. And we'd start with an empty arena every day, and we brought in our own stage, and that would go in, and then we had risers, and we had inflatables, and we had overhead pieces, and we had video elements, and we had speakers, and we had lasers, and we had lighting trusses, and then we wound up with that. Wow. And so that's kind of the journey of how we kind of come up with production or lighting design. And there's always this moment that I love where the house lights go out and the audience goes ballistic. And you kind of remember back to that first meeting where you're promising someone you're going to make old mossy balls. And I think that, again, part of the creative process is I've learned that I've got to be creative with people, with managing the logistics part of things, which I don't like personally, but it's all part of it. And I think that something that I realized a few years ago is the idea that I've got a creative job. Well, it feels sometimes that only the 5% of that job is actually being creative. The rest, in terms of sitting down and drawing something and creatively coming up with creative ideas. And the other 95% of it is creatively getting it done, or creatively making sure that only half your crew are crying at any point in time. So I've got a couple more. This, again, same thing. Mel, hey, I got a song called Carousel. Let's get a carousel ride that's a two-headed rabbit. It's incredible. This was on a lift that went up and down, so as the video projection changed behind, she was kind of riding up and down. This is a fun show. This is a really fun show. Everything looked natural, and which again was kind of like a big ask. Here's another great example of kind of lighting when, we knew we were doing all these things, but when we actually got there, I found that the lights that I had really near the portal created this kind of beautiful texture when it raked down and it really revealed the foliage and really sold the idea that was organic. So that was kind of like I'm glad I thought of that when I hadn't at all. And this is kind of the end result. So that's kind of the journey of being creative as a lighting designer and coming to tell all you fabulous people about it. So that's kind of it. And like I said, I think that the biggest realization for me was two things that I love. One, the fact that technical innovation has given us all these things. We didn't have the ability to show video. We didn't have the ability to strobe lights or move them really quickly. Now we've got all these other things that we can use to enhance the music and entertain people. I also feel as though the bar's really high. When you guys come to shows, you've seen other shows. So we can't really come in with park hands anymore and blink them on a little 12-channel board. But it does give us this kind of ability, and I really love the fact, for me, I get to work with super creative people, and everyone gets to layer all their little kind of their little additives, and it all kind of builds up into this really huge, complicated thing that's basically there just to entertain you and to have you come to the show and forget about how cold it is outside. Enjoy yourself. And that's pretty much all I got. Drew. Save me.